afternoon. My name is Ashok Guru. I'm the director of India-China Institute at the New School. I want to really begin by welcoming you all here today, especially on such a short notice that people managed to work their schedule and be here with us. So I'm grateful to you all. This event is certainly a very special one because Madam Nirupama Rao, whom I consider as a friend, especially a good friend of India-China Institute, who, as you can imagine, has many competing demands on her time, really took the time to come and speak to us at the New School. It's really, in some ways, when we're thinking about India-China and its future interactions, there are very few people who could speak to this issue the way she could, because she has been at the center of both shaping, advancing, and in many ways, developing the India-China interactions the way they are emerging. And in that conversation, of course, there are some thorny issues, which I hope she will touch upon, but at the same time, there is indeed a lot of excitement as to how the India-China interactions have emerged, especially in the past 10 years. In a few minutes, the new president of the New School, President David Van Zandt, will give a few welcoming remarks and introduce Ms. Rao to you. So I'll reserve this time to extend words of gratitude to those who have made this event a possibility. As with any such events, many individuals have been involved, and I'm really delighted that there are many who are not part of the New School, people like Professor Thompson Sen, who have really made this event possible. So I want to thank colleagues from various institutions who worked with us to put together this event. Let me take a few minutes to really thank distinguished permanent representative of India, Mr. H.S. Puri, two other ambassadors, Mr. Dayal here, and also Nepal's permanent representative to the UN, Mr. Gyan Acharya, for really taking the time to come and participate in today's conversation. I want to also welcome the delegation, Madam Rao's delegation, who is here today. So I think it would be also important to mention many of the India-China Institute fellows. Some of them have already met Madam Rao in our home, or it used to be her home in Beijing, including my dear friend and partner in this enterprise of establishing the China Institute, Jia Jianin, who is right behind there, a good friend of Madam Rao as well. Let me say a few words about our new president. I think it's really a wonderful opportunity for us to welcome him, but also to introduce him to the growing community of India-China Institute. Our community not only consists of fellows, these are about 36 or so fellows, mostly New School scholars, experts and scholars from India and China, but also really a lot of other scholars from neighboring institutions in New York area, but also in India and China. Those who have begun to really come together to study, to analyze, and to really facilitate much more deeper interaction between India and China. So we're very proud that India-China Institute, within a very short period of time, has become a hub where a lot of very interesting interactions, very interesting conversations and research agendas have begun to emerge. I want to also take time to really thank my staff. When I say my staff, actually, I don't have a big staff. It really consists of mostly graduate students. So I just want them to raise their hands just to be recognized for working very hard in the past 3 days or so to put together this event. Thank you all. I want to also say thank you to my colleague and a friend, Michael Cohen, who is the founding director of Graduate Program in International Affairs. They are co-sponsoring this event with us today, and now I would like to invite him to say a few words.
Thanks, Ashok. Let me just join you in welcoming everyone here today, particularly Madam Secretary. There's a lot of things going on in this university about India and China. We have distinguished faculty in economics and in political science, in international affairs, in the sciences, in Lang College, in Parsons. It's an institution which increasingly has focused more and more on South Asia as well as China. And I think one of the really distinctive features of the university is that we're beginning to see India and China and the interaction as a key issue worthy of academic study as well as general debate. The other thing I would say is that this university is very much committed to theory and practice. And so from our program in the Graduate Program in International Affairs, we've sent students to work in Mumbai, to work in tsunami relief on the coast of India. People have been in various states, and it's something that we hope to build on in the future. We have a course, actually an India-China course, which is perhaps one of the few such courses in the country. So welcome, and look forward to hearing your remarks.
Now let me request our President, David Manjan, to introduce Madam Rao and say a few words. Here, let me add, I think even though today, I understand, is David's 38th day as being the new president of the new school.
Who's counting?
I've been told. so I can tell you that there is really this very positive energy at the new school about its future. And I'm doubly happy to tell you that he is very supportive of India-China Institute's work because of his past as well as now ongoing engagement in India and China. So thank you, David.
Thank you, Ashok. Thank you. And I am very pleased to be here. I do think the India-China Institute is a very important part of the new school, not only because we have great scholars involved and great leaders in this area, but also because this will be one of the most important foreign policy issues for the United States, at least, going forward for the next generation. The relationship between India and China not only will be important for citizens of India and citizens of China, but also for us here. So with that in mind, I'm very delighted to have the honor of welcoming you, Madam Rao, to the new school. We are really humbly grateful for all the support and interest you've shown over the years in the India-China Institute. Just to give you a little background, Madam Rao has a distinguished career of foreign service. Since 2009, she has served as the Foreign Secretary of India. She is an admitted and respected diplomat, and she's held other important positions for the government of India, including Ambassador to China, Minister of Press Affairs in Washington, D.C., Deputy Chief of Mission in Moscow, and she was the first woman spokesperson of the External Affairs Ministry, and also she's been the High Commissioner to Sri Lanka. Most notably, she was a member of the delegation to Rajiv Gandhi's historic visit to Beijing in 1998. Well, that sounds like she keeps quite busy, but I do need to point out to you she has other great skills and talents. She is an accomplished pianist, singer, and a published poet. So without embarrassing too much, I may ask you later on to either sing, recite some poetry. I'm sorry we don't have a piano here. So your talk today on the relationship between India and China cannot be more timely. The emergence of India and China, as I mentioned before, on the global stage is really critical to shaping developments in the next generation. Building on its distinct and rich tradition of global engagement and innovation, the new school recognizes the importance of better understanding the rapidly changing global context. The Institute has and will continue to play an important role in promoting scholarship and enhancing discourse regarding issues relating to India and China. In order to foster long-term engagement and outside-the-box thinking, the Institute has convened a community of scholars and experts who are working collaboratively to enhance and influence research and policy discourse on issues ranging from environmental sustainability to urbanization. In this regard, I'm proud to tell you that one of our guests here today, the noted writer and ICI representative, Jingyan Zhao, recently was among a group of very select individuals who were invited to meet with President Barack Obama in the White House and offer their insights prior to his meeting with Chinese President Hu Jintao. Well, having Madam Rao join us today marks an important opportunity for us to continue this important conversation that the ICI has helped to foster over the years. Once again, on behalf of the New School and all of our faculty, students, and staff, it's my great honor to welcome you here today. So I give you Madam Rao.
Thank you, Professor Van Zandt, for those words of welcome. Thank you, Ashok. It's wonderful to be back here. It's wonderful to see Jianying Jia, my good friend. And I remember the many occasions we met in Beijing when you brought the scholars over from the India-China Institute, and the discussions were fascinating because we got to see a cross-section of Chinese scholars that we normally would not have interacted with in the normal government situations, government-to-government situations. So for us, it was extremely useful to be having that opportunity to meet with your group of scholars. And I see a lot of old friends in the audience, and it's wonderful to be back in New York and to meet with all of you and to speak on India-China relations. My good friend Tan Sen Sen is also here, and I think the inspiration for this lecture draws in many senses from a speech I gave in Singapore a little less than a month ago on Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore's vision of India and China, a 21st century perspective. So when I spoke to Ashok, and we've been in correspondence over the last few days, the impression I got was that he would like me to also take a cue from that lecture and speak to you on the what scholar Tan Chung has called the geo-civilizational paradigm of India-China relations. Let me first start by saying that just in the last year, 2010, India and China have commemorated the 60th anniversary of the establishment of their diplomatic relations. And just in December 2010, at the fag end of the year, Premier Wen Jiabao was in Delhi to participate in the closing ceremony of the Festival of China in India. And this brought to a close a calendar of activities organized in both countries to commemorate the occasion of the 60th anniversary of establishment of diplomatic relations. Of course, the relations between the two countries, and you all know that, date back many millennia. And that's where the Tagore aspect comes in, because when I spoke in Singapore, I drew reference to the fact that Tagore saw this relationship in civilizational terms. And he made that visit to China 87 to 88 years ago. And he went to China with a message of brotherhood, of fraternal partnership, which he felt symbolized the relations between the two countries. His vision was of a mutually beneficial, interactive relationship between two great civilizations, and he passionately advocated the opening of a path between the two countries. So, in a sense, what we try to do today, and the path we seek to chart in the relationship, can, I believe, draw inspiration from the work of scholars like Tagore. And in fact, Tagore is important also because it was his effort that really initiated a more scientific study of China in India. He set up the China Bhavana in Shantiniketan, which was the university town where he established the Vishwa Bharati, literally a world university, world Indian university. Something of that spirit I think we try to revive today when we look at the re-establishment of the Nalanda University in Bihar. We were just talking about Bihar as we walked down and came down the elevator. Nalanda University again was a world university in the Buddhist era of our history and was destroyed a few centuries ago. And out of the East Asia Summit in which India is involved has come this idea that we should revive the Nalanda University and make it once again a world center of learning. And here again, one cannot but help reflect on the China connection between India, with India, and especially you look at the lives that were mortgaged to pilgrimage, as it were. The Chinese scholar Qi Xianlin, who died 2 years ago, one of China's most famous modern Indologists, spoke about that, lives being mortgaged to pilgrimage. And the pilgrims of the Buddhist era between India and China did just that. They mortgaged their lives to pilgrimage and to scholarship and to debate. And when you talk of today, it's fashionable, let me say, to talk about competition between India and China. But when you look back at that time, the centuries of contact in that particular period of history, it was more defined in the sense of debate, not so much in terms of contest or conflict or competition, but in terms of debate and a traffic of ideas. So that is really what the spirit of Tagore and his outlook on China was all about. In fact, I'd like to also quote something that Qi Xianlin said when he spoke of China and India standing simultaneously on the Asian continent with their neighborliness created by heaven and constructed by earth. So, you know, I thought I'd speak about the interactions in the 21st century, but before that I wanted to give you an idea about the matrix in which this relationship is placed today. And for that you really have to go back to the 50s of the last century when India was newly independent and the People's Republic of China had just been established. And this was a time when both our countries, in a sense, rediscovered each other, seeking to grasp the sense of synergy between two of the largest populated countries in the world on a global stage. And this sense of developing a synergy is in a way an unfinished agenda, because today, as we regain our place in Asia and the world as leading global economies, we are trying, through the relationship that we have, to craft that sense of synergy, but being aware constantly of the complexities in the relationship and the unfinished agenda when it comes to normalization, complete normalization. There is awareness, of course, of the muffled footsteps, as Tagore said, of historical contact between our two peoples. The fact that this inspired the well-intentioned efforts in the 50s to build the Panchshila, or the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, an attempt that was star-crossed in many senses because it faltered and telescoped into a troubled phase, which enveloped our relationship in the 60s and up until the mid-70s because of the conflict over the boundary. Through those difficult days, however, our leadership and leadership in both countries, I think in essence, understood the untenability of protracted estrangement between India and China. And so in the last 3 decades, we have made concerted efforts to establish, let me say, a framework for a stable, a more productive, and a multi-spectrum or sectoral relationship between India and China, where we have sought to manage contradictions and where differences have not prevented and expanding bilateral engagement, and the building of congruence in areas where we can build such congruence. So in a sense, the warp and the weft of the relationship have elements of cooperation and elements of competition. And let me speak to you a little about the specifics of that engagement. And why I think it's important that we focus more intensively on this relationship between India and China is because also today there is a very heightened sense of awareness of what Asia's identity can be in the 21st century. And when it comes to regarding Asia, or focusing on Asia, you're bound to focus on these two largest countries of Asia, India and China. And there again, I think, ancient ideas don't need to be antiquated. And the sense of Asia, the Asia of the past, where people spoke of literally a common economic space, where you had an approach that was defined by secularism and a complementariness of interests, a balanced commercial equilibrium enhanced by a concept of spiritual unity. This was really what our forefathers engaged in when they looked at the interaction between countries in Asia, marked by a sense of tolerance, openness, lack of prejudice to outsiders, a spirit of enterprise, an absence of trade barriers. And in a sense, the past should, I think, serve as a rough guide to the future. And that is exactly what people like Tagore had in mind when they spoke of India and China coming together. So when you look at the challenges, let me come back to the relationship between India and China. When you look at the challenges between the two countries, the challenges that confront us, we also see opportunities. And as our Prime Minister has said, you have an image before you of India and China continuing to grow very fast simultaneously. And our policies will have to cater to this emerging reality of the rise of these two countries, just for the two countries themselves. For us, the situation is definitely complex, since China is our largest neighbor, and also because China is today a major power in the world, both from the traditional geopolitical point of view, as well as the more current geo-economic point of view. And in the world of today, China is a factor in several equations, and therefore it is intellectually satisfying, once again let me come back to the subject of scholarship, that scholarship in India is also increasingly dedicated to looking more closely at all facets of China. And as a nation, we believe we would like to encourage more efforts to accelerate an intellectual drive to understand China better. In fact, when Premier Wen Jiabao came, one of the announcements that is reflected in the joint statement issued at the end of that visit is that Chinese, Mandarin Chinese, will be taught as a subject in our schools from middle school onwards from this year, commencing with this year. So this is, a reflection of the interest that Indians take in China today and the desire to understand China more comprehensively and more profoundly, let me say that. Now, we all know China's rapid economic growth over the last 3 decades has been spectacular and riveting. It's now the second largest economy in the world, with a huge GDP of roughly $5.5 trillion US, and its youth, particularly among its people, seem focused on improving their living standards in the quest for a more prosperous future. And certainly politics does not seem to define their everyday if we look at the contrast between India and China. China has, of course, begun to deal in the currency of global power, and its economic success is impacting its foreign, defense, and security policies. Now, the appellation of assertiveness is frequently applied to China's global profile today. And the question that I'm always asked is whether our relationship with China will be one dominated by increasing competition for influence and for resources as our economic needs also grow. But I really believe that neither of us has the luxury of seeing each other in purely antagonistic terms. The view that India and China are rivals, to me, is an overgeneralization as well as an oversimplification of a complex relationship which encompasses so many diverse issues. I believe that the proposition of competition and rivalry should not be exaggerated in a manner that it overshadows our genuine attempts to manage and transact a rationally determined relationship between India and China. And the reality is that both our countries have worked hard over the last 2 decades to enhance dialogue in a number of fields, and we must maintain and build on that trend. It's true that divergences persist. There's no denying the fact that we have a disputed border. There are legacies as well as lessons bequeathed to us by history. The border question, the boundary question, as we call it, is a complex problem, and the cartographies that define national identity are internalized in the minds of people of both countries. At the same time, we're making a serious attempt to arrive at a fair, a reasonable, and mutually acceptable solution of the boundary question, as the recent 14th round of the special representatives appointed by both governments in their talks will testify. We've had 14 rounds of such talks to just discuss a settlement of the boundary question, and we have arrived at agreement on guiding principles and political parameters that could form a framework for a settlement of the boundary question. The absence of a solution to the question is not due to lack of effort, but arises from the difficulty of the question itself, as any analyst in the audience will surely appreciate. What also needs to be appreciated is that the India-China boundary is one of the most peaceful of all borders. We have in place an organized set of measures, or what we call confidence-building measures, or CBMs, to ensure peace and tranquility in the border areas. We are currently talking to each other on establishing more such mechanisms. I believe there is maturity on both sides to understand the complexity of the issue and to insulate it from affecting our broader relationship. I believe this policy has paid dividends and has contributed towards reducing the possibility of conflict. I would like to dwell briefly on defense exchanges between India and China, because I think when you talk about the boundary question, you also dwell on the issue of what the role of the respective defense establishments would be. Now, we have had defense exchanges between India and China, including small-scale anti-terrorism related military exercises. At present, our high-level military exchanges are on hold. And I don't know how many of you have been following this debate in the media of late, but some differences have arisen over the fact that China recently did not accept an army delegation from our Northern Command. The Northern Command covers Jammu and Kashmir, and the Chinese said that they would not be in a position to accept that delegation, which was a point of view that we did not agree with. And so consequent upon that, defense exchanges have not moved forward because there's been a certain trough that has been created by this. But all the same, flag meetings of border personnel along the line of actual control have continued. So the situation in the border areas remains tranquil. So when it comes to defense exchanges, I believe it would be right for me to say that there is desire to slowly expand these exchanges, but there have been limits to this process. And I think the question here again, which is debated quite often these days, is about the role of the People's Liberation Army. Is it more assertive than before? What is the contribution it makes to the formation of foreign policy vis-a-vis China's neighbors? I think this is a subject that we could talk about at length, but if I were to dwell on it for longer, my speech would be too to extend it. But talking of bright spots in our relations, I would look at the economic interaction or commercial interaction. China, as you know, is now India's largest trading partner, and trade was 61.7 billion US dollars end of last year, 2010. There is imbalance in this trade, however. Our exports were $20.8 billion to China, while our imports from China were 40.9 billion US dollars. So the trade deficit is worrying. And given the composition of our trade, we export a lot of raw materials and raw commodities to China, and China exports a lot of finished goods and machinery and huge infrastructure-related machinery to India. We would like to sell more value-added products to China, including pharmaceuticals and computer software. However, the Chinese government, in our view, will have to dismantle non-tariff barriers to such trade and provide us greater market access. Challenges in the medium term include attracting Chinese companies to invest in and manufacture from India. This will provide jobs, and this is a huge thing in India as it is in the United States. I think this would be a good move for the Chinese to make in order to address some of the misgivings we have as far as the imbalance in the business and commercial relationship is concerned. We'd like to see greater Chinese participation in building infrastructure in India, including financing of such projects. Similarly, science and technology exchanges are not very vibrant, and both sides, again, have much to learn from each other. There is potential for the future, and here I'd just like to dwell on something that would be of interest. When Premier Wajirabao was in India last December, he met with a section of media and academic and cultural personalities on how to improve perceptions of Indians and Chinese about each other. You see, there is also an information gap between the two countries, a perceptional gap also. When you talk to the average Chinese, they don't know very much about India, and the idea of Indian democracy and the seeming chaos that they associate with Indian democracy seems very somehow foreign to the Chinese mind, and I think it comes from a lack of understanding of the way these processes work and a distance in terms of really seeing India up and close and visiting India more often, trying to engage with Indian society. So I think there is a gulf to be bridged there. And I think this is what Premier Wan set out to do when he met with a cross-section of these people. And one of the ideas that came out from that meeting was that we should really be looking at more interaction between the two countries in innovation, in technology, in scientific exchanges, which we're not doing very much at the moment. We have now, for instance, the Japanese, with the Japanese, India and Japan cooperate now a great deal in this area, not just in infrastructure creation, but also, between scientific establishments, between academic institutions. Japan is setting up a new IIT in India, in Hyderabad. So there is, there's a lot of this interaction that goes on with many of our other partners, with China, that has not yet taken off. Similarly, people-to-people exchanges are not very sizable at present, and we should expand these contacts. Tourism from China to India is still very small. However, there are 7,000 Indian students studying in China today, and most of them study medicine, in fact. But what's interesting is, apart from the fact that they're studying Western medicine in China, they are located all over China. And they come from every part of India. It's not just that they come from the big cities of Delhi or Mumbai or Chennai or Kolkata. They come from small district towns and small provincial areas And they're in the heartland of China, right in the interior, studying, spending 4 to 5 years there. So there's a whole new generation of Indians being exposed to China in that way. And similarly, there are a number of Chinese students in India, but nowhere near the numbers that we have in China. As I mentioned, we've also introduced Chinese as a foreign language for study in our schools, and we want to prepare our younger generation for this new relationship that we are building with China. Similarly, in the global area, in organizations such as the Brazil, Russia, India, China BRIC Forum, which will soon be expanded to include South Africa when the BRIC countries meet in China 2 months from now, and also in the BASIC group in the field of environment, in the Conference of Parties on the Environment. China and India have been cooperating very closely, as also in the G20, where we are both important member countries, on the reform of international financial institutions, for instance. So here again, multilaterally, I think the scope for cooperation has broadened and deepened. And at the leadership level, I think it may or may not come as a surprise to you that our leaders have been meeting very, very frequently. In fact, Prime Minister met Mr. Hu Jintao 12 times between our Prime Minister met President Hu Jintao 12 times between 2005 and 2010, and he's met Premier Wen Jiabao 11 times in that same period. So there is very frequent communication and contact between the two sides. Today we are called strategic and cooperative partners for peace and prosperity. That's how India and China define their relations. And the relationship, as I said, has become increasingly multifaceted. We are closely interacting with each other in a number of areas, and also, as I said, on issues concerning the global economic situation. Just recently, as a follow-up, as a result of Premier Wen Jiabao's visit in December, our two governments have decided to institute a strategic economic dialogue as a measure of the increasing complexity and sophistication of their dialogue on economic issues. So we will just commence that new dialogue this year. So this is a new addition to what we do in the relationship. The challenge, I believe, in this century when it comes to India and China, and this is a relationship that is really going to be, I think, I wouldn't be exaggerating when I draw reference to what a scholar, Chinese scholar, Tan Yun Shan, said about Sino-Indian relations being the most important of the most important. I think when it comes to the relationship between these two big Asian countries, these giants, I think a lot of what happens in this relationship will impact the situation in our region, and particularly also when it comes to the economic strength, the rising economic strength of both these countries. The world certainly is watching and assessing the impact of this relationship when it comes to the environment in which we are situated today. Before I conclude, I think I should also refer to the fact of China's relationship with Pakistan. There is that question that also comes up, and most people who follow this whole issue would be interested in hearing our views on it. Now, Pakistan is one of our most important neighbors, and we believe that a stable Pakistan, a prosperous Pakistan, is in India's interest, and we're not against Pakistan's relations with other countries. Because relationships, again, we don't believe relationships between countries are zero-sum games, and at the same time, we don't hesitate to stress our genuine concerns regarding some aspects of the China-Pakistan relationship, particularly when it comes to China's presence in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, China's policy on Jammu and Kashmir, and China-Pakistan security and nuclear relationship. And here we have, we have welcomed a more open discussion with China on these issues. And I believe as mutual confidence grows in this relationship, we will have more opportunity to discuss these issues and also to seek more clarity and more transparency on as in regard to the concerns that we have raised. The issue of giving stapled visas to Indian nationals from the state of Jammu and Kashmir also arises in a similar context. So these are issues that are of concern to us when it comes to the China-Pakistan relationship, because when China gives a staple visa to an Indian living in Jammu and Kashmir, the inference that we draw from that is that somehow the status of Jammu and Kashmir is being questioned by China. And the issue of Indian sovereignty over Jammu and Kashmir is being questioned by China. So this is an issue that we need to resolve. The Chinese government has told us that they are giving serious attention to this and they would like to see it resolved. And we are hoping that there will be a satisfactory resolution to this. So what I'd like to say is that we believe that the India-China relationship will grow even stronger once China shows more sensitivity on these issues, these core issues that we feel impinge on our sovereignty and our territorial integrity, and we hope that this can be realized. Finally, what I'd like to say is that people talk about security architectures for Asia. And here again, I think there is immense scope for India and China to engage in closer dialogue with each other, because there are issues of maritime security, of the issues concerning the global commons in our region, the issue of terrorism, the issue of just ensuring that we have a peaceful periphery. All these, I think, we share common concerns. And we have stressed, rather than excluding China from any debate or discussion on security in our region, it would be, I think, rational to follow a more inclusive approach that involves more engagement with China, more discussion, more exchange of ideas with Chinese stakeholders, so that we have a balanced and inclusive security architecture in our region. And this would serve the interests of both India and China, we feel. Now, as India and China pursue their interests, and so long as their overwhelming preoccupation remains their domestic transformation, both of us, I think, will understand that this goal, or the realization of this goal, requires a peaceful environment around us. And as I said before, there will be elements of competition in our bilateral relationship, but these can be managed so that the elements of congruence or common ground, as Premier Zhou Enlai said so long ago, can be built upon. As our interests get progressively more complex, at the same time, the costs of any withdrawal from engagement will also rise. So I believe ultimately that this is a big relationship with the clear possibility of both sides pursuing an ambitious agenda for mutual engagement that will make this relationship one of the most important bilateral equations of our century. And it's in our interest, therefore, I believe, to view it in a more wide-angled and a higher definition manner than we have ever done before. I'll stop here and then I'll take questions.
Thank you very much, Madam. One thing I do want to point out is that she is joining us having just walked off a plane from Mumbai. So we are doubly honored that myself, I would have gone right to the hotel and gone to bed. So, but we're really pleased to have you. So if you are willing to answer a few questions, we'll try not to keep you too long. So.
We have mics here.
Excuse me.
Maybe I should sit down.
Yeah, why don't you
sit down rather than stand up.
Maybe we'll take,
So-
seems there are lots of people want to ask questions. Yes, sir. Please make it brief because I know that a lot of people want to ask questions.
Yeah, just to the Foreign Secretary. Ms. Rao, I'm a great fan of yours. I've been following you for several years. This is the first time I'm seeing you in person. All this time I see all the pictures only. In person you look much prettier than. I'll make the question brief. You gave a wonderful narration of the whole thing, starting from before Christ. And in the beginning, it was very, very good relationship between India and China. And now we are making an effort to get back to that stage. In between, the friction, I think, occurred due to the border problem starting in the early 60s. And that was because, if I understand correctly, General McMahon drew up the line between these two countries. When he drew up, was China aware of the problem, that it was not acceptable to them? If so, why suddenly it came up later? And even when Nehru was talking with Chow and Lai, that Hindi, Chini, bye, and all that, did they bring up this issue at all? Just if you can throw some light on that. Thank you.
I'll try to answer that as briefly as I can because it's the subject of very lengthy expositions of who's right and who's wrong. But as far as the McMahon line is concerned, this is something that goes back to 1913, 1914. And it was a line that was drawn on the map in the eastern sector of the India-China border in the early years of the 20th century. And when India became independent, that was recognized as the border in the eastern sector between India and China. No, just a minute, I'm coming to that. Now, it so happened that in the 50s, when India and China began to talk about these issues for the first time, you see, previous to that, in the British era, in the British colonial period, up until 1947, China and India had never spoken about these issues. There was some correspondence that was exchanged with the Tibetan establishment in Lhasa, between the British Indian government and the Tibetan establishment in Lhasa, but not really with the Chinese government to discuss, how they saw this particular delineation of the boundary in the particular location I referred to. But in the 50s, when it began to be discussed for the first time, that was when the Chinese ventilated their objections or their views about this section of the boundary, saying that it would not be possible for them to accept it. But however, let me add that at that time, when we discussed it between the two sides, the impression or the indication given by the Chinese were that they were prepared to take a realistic view of the situation. And they did that, in fact, with Burma. The section of the McMahon line that covers the Burma-Tibet frontier was, in a sense, settled on the basis of that line in the discussions held between the Burmese and the Chinese governments in the late 1950s, and was signed and sealed and settled in 1960 when they had their agreement, boundary agreement. But when it comes to the Indian section of that McMahon line, it is still to be recognized by China, and China has said that they don't accept the McMahon line in the eastern sector.
Do you have a question over here? Good.
Hi, Madam Rao. It's good to see you again. We first met in Beijing.
That's right.
And I remember well the two songs you sang for us. I am the faculty member who teaches the course on India-China interactions, and I have many students here. And I can tell you, each year I teach the course, more and more students sign up because of their interest in this relationship. Of particular concern in this relationship, as you mentioned, is the 62 border war. And in trips to both India and China, I have heard members of the military establishment, particularly in India, take a very hawkish stand on this border issue. And given your commitment to the fact that there are segments of Indian and Chinese leadership who see this border issue in broader terms and do see the possibility of reconciliation. I wonder how much has the Indian government as well as the Chinese government put money to the fostering of a new generation of thinkers about this border war. Because if there is no commitment by the governments to develop this new generation of thinkers, then the leadership establishment will continue to think in old terms, and we will just be talking past one another. Thank you.
I think you've raised an extremely important issue. How do you break down, in a sense, certain approaches, let's put it, to a very difficult and complex problem? Obviously, it will not go away easily, and you have to find a way to not allow it to acquire dimensions that will only aggravate tensions between the two countries. So the challenge is to manage this problem and manage the situation in a manner that enables you to broaden engagement in many areas, to encourage scholars on both sides to discuss and to perhaps come out with solutions that take into account current realities and make it possible, I think, for relationships that have existed for centuries between border communities on both sides to be revived once again. And in fact, I don't know if you know Dr. Patricia Oberoi. You must have met her, and she had a very interesting, take on this very recently. And she spoke. In fact, I have the quotation here. In fact, Kansen will remember this from my lecture in Singapore when I referred to let me wear my glasses. Yeah. Right now, the institution of the nation state is defined by territorial boundaries, as we all know. And Patricia talks about this, how this, with this concept come notions of center and periphery, mainland and margins, and the justified use of force in their defense. And this is a quote. And she says, maybe, and somebody like Tagore, again coming back to Tagore, would have thought of frontier zones between the two countries as revolving doors, as creative spaces where civilizations meet, not as trouble spots of contemporary geopolitics. So if this sort of a sustainability, if we can create in the relationship, would be, I think, useful. But it will require immense, rethinking, I think, for both our countries to look at it that way. That'll be the challenge. And I think, when you talk of the military establishment in India, I would hesitate using the word hawkish. I deal with them constantly, and I think they are, I think, committed to an engagement with China that enables the better understanding of each other's positions with the goal being that we don't allow tensions to escalate along our common border. And we have many ideas that I think, if were put into practice, which are pragmatic, which involves a pragmatic recognition of realities as they exist today. How can we improve communications? How can we strengthen border trade? How do we enable more contact, as I said, between communities on the two sides? And how do we put in place better confidence-building measures that enable the armies of the two sides to be able to operate in a manner that does not increase tension? And it's a question of management, a border regime that is effective and enables normalcy to prevail, even if you haven't really drawn a line on the map that is mutually agreed, which may take time.
Okay. We have a question over here.
Thank you, Madam Secretary Betwa Sharma from the Press Trust of India. Ma'am, could you talk a little bit about how China feels about India becoming a permanent member of the Security Council? And also, last year, President Obama was very forthright in his endorsement of India. Do you expect, does India want such an endorsement from China? Is it forthcoming? And what's the current status like? Thank you.
Since this question is from the Press Trust of India, I'm sure that you're looking at the next newspaper headline. But I will answer that in as matter of fact a manner as I can, and say that, of course, it would be useful for China to endorse India's desire and claim to be a permanent member of the Security Council. What China has said so far is that it understands India's aspirations to play a greater role in the United Nations, and it is basically stopped there. I know, following President Obama's endorsement of India's candidature, you had Premier Wan Jiabao come to India. Let me say that the discussions that we had with Premier Wan on that occasion were useful, and certainly I think there is very greater, and I would say much greater awareness on China's part about India's aspirations to become a member of the Security Council, and indeed the groundswell of support within the United Nations. We were just doing a tally the other day, and I think at least 128 member countries of the United Nations have expressed their support for India's candidature, in terms of just India's candidature alone. Of course, I'm very conscious of the realities, and much more work has to be done in this regard, so it's not going to happen tomorrow or day after tomorrow. But my own feeling is that when it really comes, and I may be accused of being unduly optimistic, but if it comes to the decision-making point, the inflection point, when it's a question of the Security Council being expanded and India being admitted, I doubt very much if China would oppose that move when it comes to that. But as of now, of course, China is not expressing itself openly in favor of India's candidature.
Let's take one more question over here, and then we'll let you go.
Madam Secretary, it's really a pleasure and an honor to have you visit the New School. I'm one of the faculty here. I'm also an India-China fellow. I visited Yunnan last year, and I was quite struck by the senior policymakers I met and the eagerness to improve their ties with the border regions in India. At the same time, within India, there's been some muted disappointment at the extent of improvement in interactions across Northeast India, especially. Perhaps our expectations were too high. So my question is if you could just speak a little bit about the challenges in normalizing the situation in Northeast India.
I always, when I look at Northeast India, I say India is a Southeast Asian nation. Honestly, because Southeast Asia begins in Northeast India. It does, because you look at the 8 states of Northeast India and the similarities with Southeast Asia. Yunnan, of course, when you look at Yunnan, it's still a little distant, but yes, in history and in the past, obviously there have been a lot of cross-cultural links, ethnic mixtures between Northeast India, Southeast Asia, and even Southwest China. But I think geopolitics today has, created a lot of distances, political, geographic, emotional. I mean, there are a lot of gaps that we need to bridge, and that may not happen immediately. But let's start with closer linkages between Northeast India and Southeast Asia, for instance. Already into Burma, from Manipur, we are talking of better roads.
And supporting the India-China Institute and the New School. I now invite everyone to remain for a recession here with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.